Hey again. Sorry about earlier. I was interrupted by the bus basically leaving me. Overestimated on my time. Anyway, the point I was trying to make was that, sorry. It's like clockwork with these people. It's like as soon as I grab my phone and I'm gonna tape one of these videos, it's like they all get bunched together, all the guys who are cleaning the streets, like, oh yeah, that guy over there, he's recording something, let's make as much noise as possible. Yeah, anyway, so what I was trying to say earlier was that I was setting up Java again, and I realized how much there is to do and to learn, to know and so forth, for especially when you're like not that comfortable with it. I mean, it's just massive, and it's also something which is a little bit bothersome when in terms of knowing what to do. I mean, if you're starting Java development today, odds are that you're gonna make a search for Java tutorials or something of that sort, and you're gonna get a bunch of different videos that are gonna touch on all kinds of different things. So it's hard to get a feel for what's being used out there. And if I then cross-reference that with what I saw on the job market and the job postings, it's actually kind of interesting, because it seems to me that although the range of tools and so forth is fairly narrow in comparison to, I mean, everything's narrow in comparison to JavaScript, the diversity is still there. Like, a lot of different companies are looking for all kinds of different database, like people who know different databases and like different different ORMs and like all that stuff. I mean, they're still looking for it. And even further is that they're looking for people who have a deeper understanding of like architecture and all other kinds of good stuff. So that kind of puts me, like, it makes me ask the question, what's the big difference in terms of knowledge overhead and like knowing things? I mean, in JavaScript, let's start by just having a look at, okay, what's the different requirements for like a Node.js developer? Well, 99.9999% of all the Node developers out there are going to work with the same tech stack, like roughly the same thing. There might be a library here and there that's off and does something a little bit differently, but for the most part, at least, there are resources and fairly up-to-date documentations and like all that good stuff, and there are people today who are actually actively contributing in terms of knowledge sharing and like doing tutorials and all that stuff. That's not happening as much in Java. And I think it's for the same reason why I argue that if you go to a Java conference, you can bet your monthly, like your yearly salary, that every single person who's going to make a presentation is roughly every single person who's going to make that presentation is going to be in their 40s, and most of them are, talking about JavaScript as if it's this. I'm not all of them, there are exceptions, but they talk about other technology as if it's this obscure thing that they haven't like put so much effort into. And I can understand that, because if you go into I think it's connected. I think that there is so much to know and so many things about Java that you kind of have to take into account. And like, it takes a lot of time and effort to know that platform. And once you know that platform, I think you don't actually have to go outside of that box all that much. It's very safe. It's the same thing with C# and .NET, I think. It's a different mindset, if you will. Like, back in the day when most of these languages was, were like the in thing, that was the philosophy. You had these languages and they did everything for you. Like, you had there was no reason to diversify at all, and it changed. I read a really good article about why Ruby on Rails isn't a good choice any longer. Like, it's not, Ruby isn't dead, but it's no longer the poster child it once was. And I think the point that the article was making was that if you look at historically how things worked, Ruby really got its adoption and popularity from a shift in paradigm in the IT world. And that shift had nothing to do with, like, it had nothing to do with the language. It had to do with the industry itself. Because historically, it was really only the big vendors like Microsoft and Apple and like these like really, or not Apple, but Microsoft and these like really big corporations that owned like these like Java and C#. That was the standard, and C++ was also a standard. Like these were the three languages you would use for almost everything. And then like the startup scene came along, and you kind of smaller vendors and like people, or rather smaller companies and individual developers started becoming productive and actually making something of themselves. I mean, this was before Google, this was before Facebook and all that stuff. So, and before Twitter, like all these, that's like these companies are by our standards today massive super companies, right? But they weren't around. So the article says basically that Ruby, who was adopted by Twitter and these other companies, and like that, it came along at a stage in time when the IT industry was shifting from having these three languages who were owned and like by the really big corporations to being a much like a more accessible world. Like you didn't have to go through, like smaller companies started trying to do IT. Smaller companies were trying to break through and kind of get away some of the dominant power that these super companies were representing, IBM and like all these who like they own the IT world. And today it's shifted, so nobody's really listening to these companies anymore in as much. I mean, the most popular tech conferences and so forth are hosted by Google and Facebook and like these startups or like these more modern companies. And I think the article makes a final point, which is kind of interesting, and I agree. Like, what's happened is that now it's more chaotic than ever before. You have so many different languages that, you know, it's a different way of working. I can see it in my older colleagues as well. Like, basically the article also states that the developers that are coming around today are very impatient in comparison, because like today it's more about rapidly learning new technologies and all this chaos in comparison to what it was back in the day, where, you know, patience and being consistent and like really methodical and having a single language you got really, really good at, and you became the expert in Java or C#, and then you kind of progressed your career in a very, what I call, I guess, slow but very, very structured and concise manner. And I agree, because like most of the colleagues that are older than me, I gives JavaScript people a criticism because, oh, you're always looking at the new thing and there's all these new libraries and stuff. And I think there's some truth in this. Like, it's a good and a bad thing at the same time, because what we have gained from this is that like more effort than ever before is going into developing accessible programming experiences for new developers. It's more important to learn new things very quickly than it is to become a super master of a single thing. And I think that, as I said, it's a good thing, and it shows. It's something that dawned on me now that I tried to do Java again, and I realized that they are falling behind in terms of accessibility, and they are falling behind in terms of, like, they have this really big superstructure of a platform, And right now I don't see any way for them to. I read a while back that Java was going to try to become the hipster language, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. And it doesn't happen because they're still on a platform that is very much about. It had its breakthrough maybe 10 years ago. Like, it's been around for long enough that it's kind of what Facebook, the same situation Facebook has. Facebook has a massive platform. It's a massive company, and it has lost its ability to be very dynamic and like make all these changes and be simple, if you will. And it's a natural progression of things. You grow bigger and bigger, and I mean, I'm pretty sure that that's going to happen for other languages. I mean, JavaScript, I love JavaScript because it's so easy and like very small a language, but I can see that things are being added as well. The platform is growing as well, and if it sticks around, it's probably going to get up into the same situation, and then in 5-10 years I'm going to be the guy who is saying that there's somehow the new obscure language that is super tiny and is more popular. And I think that's the natural evolution of things. But to summarize, what I'm trying to say here is that I think that there is a value in having a really consistent, like, strong platform that is always gonna work the same way, which is what you get from Java and C#. The thing I see as a problem, though, is that when you have a very diverse, or not diverse, but a very poorly maintained community, so that the adoption of these languages isn't all that popular, you're going to lose, even though you're going to lose in the long run, and you're going to lose mostly not because your platform is bad, but because nobody wants to learn it. Like, it's not accessible to new people. I know for the old timers there who studied like civil engineering and like all that stuff, and like you may look at the younger generation and go, "Oh, you're so spoiled." Yes, they are, and I am, or whatever. Yes, we are, but we are the next generation. So you can it's the same argument I make to my colleagues who talk about how horrible JavaScript is, and I said, yes, in many ways it is, but it's a shitstorm that is coming, and it's coming whether you like it or not. And you can either sit there, be bitter, and talk smack about how horrible everything is, or you can, man the fuck up and steer into the shit and like actually become, or rather, like I call it, become the master of the shitstorm. You can do that instead. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's why. I mean, I'm trying to sit on both chairs here. I'm trying to say that I love JavaScript, but I'm not so stupid that I don't realize the value in knowing Java and C#. That's why I try to learn both. And that's, I think, an important lesson. If you want the next generation to adopt your languages, you're going to have to look into this, whether you like it or not. Because the problem isn't that you don't have the resources or the technology to make these things be adopted. I mean, if you look here in Gothenburg, the hardest thing the recruiters are trying to find, which they will tell you, which is almost impossible to find, is Java developers. And sometimes C# developers. It's very difficult, and the reason is because nobody is learning these things naturally. So if I could give a tip to Oracle and to Microsoft, if you want to stick around and be, steal away a little bit of the popularity that is coming from Node and these other accessible languages, you have to start thinking about these things. It's about educating the next generation of developers, and if you don't do that, you are going to become obsolete very quickly. But quickly by your standards, of course, which can be 10, maybe 20 years, but you are going to be migrated out of popularity, and maybe that's okay, because I mean, as long as large corporations are using your platforms, people are going to, probably just get educated for the sake of getting a job. But look at the innovation that is happening in these younger languages, like the really skilled people that everybody's looking for, the developers who are like the genius developers of the world. They are passionate about what they do. You don't find them in these languages as much because there's less innovation going on. So think about it. It's not just about having, like like what makes a really good language has to do with more than performance or readability. It's so much more than that.